Blood runs thicker than water, son. My father-in-law's words hit like a sledgehammer as my 12-year-old adopted son Marcus stared at the trust fund documents spread across my dining room table in our Seattle home. Every other grandchild's name was there, neat, official, legally binding, except his. The annual family meeting had turned into a nightmare. 23 relatives crammed into my living room, watching as Robert Henderson, patriarch of the Henderson fortune, methodically read through his revised will. Each biological grandchild would receive $250,000 on their 18th birthday. Marcus, who we'd adopted when he was 5 and who had called me Dad for 7 years, wasn't mentioned once. "Why isn't my name there, Grandpa Rob?" Marcus asked with that devastating innocence that only children possess. "Because you're not really a Henderson boy." Robert replied, not even looking up from his papers. "This trust is for Henderson blood only. Real family." The silence that followed was crushing. I watched my son's face crumble, saw him try to process why the man he'd called grandfather for 7 years suddenly didn't consider him family anymore. The other children, my nephews and nieces, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their own trust fund documents clutched in their small hands like golden tickets. Marcus ran upstairs, his sobs echoing through the house, while my relatives sat in uncomfortable silence, some staring at their shoes, others whispering among themselves. My sister-in-law Jennifer was the first to break the tension. "Robert, that seemed a bit harsh. The boy has been part of this family for years." "The boy," Robert emphasized the words with disdain, "is not blood. This trust has been in the Henderson family for 3 generations. I won't dilute it with outsiders, no matter how convenient the arrangement has become." When I confronted Robert later in the kitchen, he was pouring himself a scotch from the bottle I kept for special occasions, helping himself to my liquor while explaining why my son wasn't good enough for his money. "It's nothing personal, David," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "But bloodlines matter. Always have, always will. That boy should be grateful for what he's already gotten. A roof over his head, an education, 3 meals a day. That's more than a lot of kids in his situation ever get." His situation? Being orphaned at age 4 when his birth parents died in a car accident wasn't a situation. It was a tragedy that led to the greatest blessing of my life. "He's your grandson, Robert. He calls you Grandpa. He made you that Father's Day card last year that you said was the best gift you'd ever received." Robert's face hardened. "Sentiment doesn't change biology, son. The trust stays as it is." My wife Sarah returned from her business trip to New York the next evening. I waited until Marcus was asleep before explaining what had happened at the family meeting. Her reaction when I told her about her father's deliberate exclusion of our son made my blood run cold. "Dad's just set in his ways," she said, barely looking up from unpacking her suitcase. "He's from a different generation. You know how he thinks about these things, old-fashioned ideas about family and inheritance." "These things?" I stared at her in disbelief. "You mean our son? The child we promised to love and protect when we adopted him?" "He's not wrong about the blood thing, David. The trust has always been for biological family members. It's not like Dad invented this rule yesterday. It's been the family policy for decades." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "So you agree with him?" "I didn't say that. I'm just saying I understand his perspective. Marcus will be fine. We can provide for his college, his future. He doesn't need Henderson money." "This isn't about money, Sarah. It's about belonging. It's about your father publicly declaring that the child we've raised for 7 years isn't real family." She sighed, the kind of exasperated sigh she used when she thought I was being unnecessarily dramatic. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be. Dad doesn't hate Marcus. He's just traditional about these things." That night, everything changed. I stood in our bedroom doorway and delivered an ultimatum that would reshape our entire lives. "You have 48 hours to choose," I told Sarah. "Either your father leaves this house, or you leave with him." Sarah's face went white. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. I won't have Marcus growing up in a house where he's treated as a second-class citizen, where the man who's supposed to be his grandfather makes him feel like he doesn't belong." "David, you're being completely unreasonable. Where is Dad supposed to go? He's 74 years old. He can't just find an apartment overnight." He should have thought about that before he decided to humiliate our son in front of the entire family. The first battle erupted at sunrise. Sarah cornered me in the kitchen while I was making breakfast for Marcus, her voice shrill with panic and disbelief. "You can't just throw him out. He's my father. He raised me. He's been nothing but generous to this family." I didn't raise my voice. I'd learned long ago that calm delivery makes words hit harder. He should have thought about that before he made our 12-year-old son feel like he's not good enough to be a Henderson. But he's my father, the only parent I have left. And Marcus is our son, the son you claim to love as much as any biological child. I turned to face her fully, setting down the coffee mug with deliberate care. Unless that was all a lie, unless adoption was just something we did to make ourselves feel good, but deep down, you agree with your father that Marcus isn't really ours. I watched her face contort as the weight of my words settled in. I could see the internal struggle, love for her father warring with love for our son. But family loyalty ran deep in the Henderson bloodline, and within seconds, her defensive walls were back up. You're being ridiculous. Dad didn't mean any harm. He's just old-fashioned. Old-fashioned is preferring handwritten letters to email, Sarah. What your father did was cruel. Deliberately, calculatedly cruel. You're making this into something it's not. Dad loves Marcus. He just has different ideas about inheritance and family legacy. If he loves Marcus, then why did he spend 20 minutes explaining to the whole family why Marcus's name couldn't be included? Why did he use words like outsider and convenient arrangement? That's not love, Sarah. That's tolerance at best, and barely concealed contempt at worst. Robert, emboldened by Sarah's support, had made himself comfortable in our guest wing. When I went to remind him he had 36 hours remaining, he greeted me with a smile that could freeze hell itself. "I'm not going anywhere, David," he said, leaning back in the leather recliner I'd bought for the room. He was reading the Wall Street Journal, his reading glasses perched on his nose, looking for all the world like the lord of the manor. "I've been paying property taxes on this house longer than you've been married to my daughter." That was news to me. "Excuse me. Who do you think helped with the down payment? The renovations? The mortgage payments when you were between jobs 3 years ago?" His smile widened, revealing teeth yellowed by decades of expensive cigars. "I have more legal right to be here than you do, son. This house exists because of Henderson money." The revelation hit like a physical blow. I'd always wondered how we'd managed to afford this 4-bedroom house in one of Seattle's better neighborhoods on my software engineer salary alone. Sarah had always been vague about the finances, handling most of the paperwork herself. Now I knew why. Robert had been pulling strings, creating dependencies, ensuring his daughter's loyalty through financial chains I'd never even seen. "How much?" I asked. "How much what?" "How much of this house do you own, Robert?" His smile became predatory. "Enough. More than enough to make your little eviction threat meaningless. You want to play hardball, son?" I invented the game. That afternoon I called my attorney, Marcus Feldman. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. The news wasn't good. If he's been contributing to mortgage payments, especially with documentation, an eviction could take 6 months or more, Marcus explained over the phone. Washington state tenant laws are very protective, even for guests who can prove financial investment in the property. My professional advice? Start documenting everything. Every conversation, every threat, every interaction with your son. In cases like this, the parent with the better evidence wins. What kind of evidence? Anything that shows a pattern of emotional abuse or deliberate harm to the child. Audio recordings if you're part of the conversation. Video evidence of concerning behavior. Witnesses to inappropriate comments. Build a case that his presence is detrimental to your son's well-being. I created a secure digital file that night. I called it the Henderson Files and began logging everything. Every snide comment about Marcus not being real family. Every time my son came downstairs crying because Grandpa Rob won't teach me chess anymore. Or Grandpa Rob said I should be more grateful for what I have. Every deliberate exclusion from family conversations. Every time Robert turned his back when Marcus tried to hug him goodbye. The pattern became clear within days. Robert wasn't disappointed about the trust fund situation. He was actively punishing Marcus for my ultimatum. The man who had once taught my son to play poker and taken him fishing was now treating him like an unwelcome intruder in his own home. The first major discovery came when I reviewed our joint bank statements. Sarah had been giving her father access to our accounts without telling me. The charges were staggering. $1,200 for a custom golf club set shipped directly to our address. $800 for a premium whiskey collection, $650 for massage therapy sessions at an upscale spa, $400 for silk shirts from Nordstrom, $300 for imported cigars, all charged to our account without my knowledge. Medical expenses, Sarah explained when I confronted her with the statements, refusing to meet my eyes. He has arthritis. The massage therapy is for pain management. The other things he's been stressed about this whole situation. He deserves some comfort items. Comfort items? Sarah, he spent more on whiskey last week than we spend on groceries in a month. And since when is a $1,200 golf club set considered medical equipment? You're exaggerating. Dad's been generous to this family for years. The least we can do is make sure he's comfortable while he's staying here. I documented every transaction. Each luxury item was another piece of evidence that Robert felt entitled to our resources while showing zero respect for our family. The golf clubs particularly galled me. He was using our money to buy toys for himself while declaring our son unworthy of family inheritance. The nuclear option came a week later. A social worker from Child Protective Services knocked on our door with an anonymous complaint about an unstable household environment putting an adopted child at risk due to severe family conflicts and potential neglect. Ms. Rodriguez was a tired-looking woman in her 40s who had clearly seen every family dysfunction imaginable. She listened patiently as I explained the situation, occasionally making notes in her file. This is unusual, she admitted after I'd given her the basic facts. Usually when we get calls about adopted children, it's about abuse or failure to provide basic needs. This complaint specifically mentioned emotional manipulation and deliberate exclusion from family activities. When I calmly explained the trust fund situation and showed her excerpts from my documentation file, her expression shifted completely. Mr. Peterson, the person who made this report provided very specific details about your home layout, your family's daily routines, and the ongoing conflict. Details that only someone living here would know. They also demonstrated unusual familiarity with adoption law and child welfare regulations. The implication was clear. You think it was Robert. I can't make accusations, but I can tell you that false reports are a felony, especially when they're made maliciously to harm a family. She handed me her card. If you have any evidence of who might have made this call, I encourage you to pursue it through proper legal channels. Sarah refused to believe her father would stoop so low when I told her about the CPS visit. It must have been one of the neighbours. Maybe someone heard raised voices and got concerned. You're paranoid, David. You're seeing conspiracies everywhere. Sarah, the person who called, knew that Marcus's bedroom faces the backyard. They knew that we keep the recycling bins on the left side of the garage. They knew that Marcus takes piano lessons on Thursdays. How would a neighbour know any of that? Maybe they observed over time. Which neighbours, Sarah? The Johnsons to our left are in their 80s and can barely see past their own driveway. The new family to our right has lived there for 3 weeks. The house behind us is empty. It's been for sale for 6 months. Who exactly has been observing us so closely? That night, I installed security cameras throughout the common areas of the house. I announced it during dinner to ensure full transparency. It's a recommendation from CPS, I explained, cutting into my steak with deliberate calm. Full transparency in the home environment helps protect everyone involved, especially Marcus. Sarah couldn't object without seeming like she had something to hide. Robert's face went pale, and I noticed his hand trembled slightly as he reached for his wine glass. Is that really necessary? He asked, trying to keep his voice casual. The social worker thought it was a good idea. Something about documenting normal family interactions to counter any future false reports. I'm sure you understand, Robert. We all want what's best for Marcus. The cameras became my salvation. The first crucial footage came 3 days later. Robert in the kitchen with Sarah at 6:30 in the morning, their voices clear as day while they thought I was still asleep. Once this amateur runs out of money for lawyers, he'll back down, Robert was saying, gesturing dismissively with his coffee mug. Besides, this house is rightfully yours anyway. Henderson money paid for it. Henderson money maintains it. That boy and his bleeding heart father are living on our charity. Sarah murmured something I couldn't make out, but she didn't disagree. She was actually nodding, while her father called her husband an amateur and referred to our son as that boy. I saved the file immediately, my hands shaking slightly as I realized the full extent of their conspiracy. The second capture was even more damning. Robert deliberately scratching the hardwood floors in the hallway with his walking cane, looking directly at the camera with a malicious grin. It wasn't an accident or a result of poor balance. It was vandalism, pure and simple. He was damaging our property on purpose, probably hoping to create repair bills that would drain our resources for the legal fight ahead. When I asked Sarah about the damage, her response confirmed how lost she was in her father's web of manipulation. Dad's balance isn't what it used to be since his hip replacement last year. He can't help it if his cane slips sometimes. Maybe we should get some of those rubber tip replacements to protect the floors. But I had video evidence of every deliberate gouge, every calculating smile, every moment where he looked directly at the camera as if challenging me to do something about it. The third piece of evidence was what broke my heart completely. The upstairs camera caught Robert going into Marcus's room while we were at work, and Marcus was at school. I watched him search through my son's belongings, examining his baseball card collection, his model airplanes, his books. Then he took Marcus's most prized possession, a baseball signed by Ken Griffey Jr., a gift from my late father before he died, and deliberately dropped it in the kitchen trash. When Marcus came home from school crying about his missing baseball, Robert was sitting in the living room reading his newspaper, Picture of Innocence. Probably lost it at school, boy, he said without looking up. Kids are careless with their things. Maybe this will teach you to be more responsible with important items. The cruelty was breathtaking. He knew exactly how much that baseball meant to Marcus. I'd told him the story myself, how my father had waited in line for 3 hours to get it signed, how he'd given it to Marcus on his adoption day with the words "Welcome to the family, grandson," and Robert had thrown it away like garbage. But I had it all on video. I retrieved the ball from the trash, cleaned it carefully, and returned it to Marcus's room without explanation. The joy on my son's face when he found it, mysteriously, returned to his room was worth everything. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning 2 weeks later. I was working in my home office, trying to catch up on some programming projects, when I heard splashing and screaming from our backyard pool. The sound sent ice through my veins. Marcus was a good swimmer, but something was wrong. I ran outside to find Marcus flailing in the deep end, fully clothed in his school uniform, while Robert stood at the pool's edge with his arms crossed, watching with cold indifference. I dove in fully dressed and pulled my son out. He was coughing up chlorinated water, shaking with cold and terror, his school clothes plastered to his small frame. "What happened?" I demanded, wrapping Marcus in a pool towel while trying to keep my voice calm. "How did you end up in the pool with your clothes on?" "He fell in," Robert said with that same cold smile I'd grown to hate. "Kids should be more careful around water. Good thing you were here to fish him out." Marcus looked up at me with eyes full of tears and fear, water still dripping from his hair. "Dad, I didn't fall. Grandpa Rob pushed me because I told him he was being mean for not putting my name with the other kids in the trust fund papers." "Children have active imaginations," Robert replied smoothly, his voice carrying just the right note of concerned adult dealing with a fanciful child. Especially ones who aren't used to taking responsibility for their actions. The boy was running around the pool area despite being told repeatedly to be careful. Physics did the rest. I looked at my son's face, then at Robert's, and knew with absolute certainty who was telling the truth. Marcus had never lied to me, not once in 7 years. But more than that, I could see it in Robert's eyes, the satisfied smirk of someone who had just gotten away with something terrible. "Marcus, go upstairs and get into warm, dry clothes," I said gently. "Take a hot shower, and then come down for some hot chocolate." After Marcus left, I turned to Robert. "If you ever touch my son again, in any way, for any reason, I will personally ensure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life." Robert's smile widened. "Is that a threat, David? Because threatening a senior citizen could be considered elder abuse. I'm sure CPS would be very interested to hear about the hostile environment you're creating." That night, as I helped Marcus with his homework, he was still shivering slightly despite the hot shower and warm clothes. I made a decision that would change everything. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on the attack. But first, I needed to confirm my suspicions about the CPS call. I called Marcus Feldman and asked him to use his investigative contacts to trace the origin of the complaint. The results came back 3 days later. The call had been made from our home phone number while I was at work, and Marcus was at school. Only 2 people had been in the house at that time, Sarah and Robert. Armed with this information, I waited for the perfect moment to spring my trap. I told Sarah I wanted to have a peaceful evening to discuss our situation like mature adults. I ordered from her favourite Italian restaurant, the little place in Pioneer Square that made her favourite osso buco. I opened a bottle of Barolo she'd been saving for a special occasion, set the dining room table with our wedding china, lit candles. I created the perfect atmosphere for what she hoped would be my surrender. Robert had gone to his weekly poker game at the country club, probably to complain about what a terrible son-in-law I was and gather sympathy from his wealthy friends. We had the house to ourselves for the first time in weeks. Sarah sat across from me at the dining table, cautious but hopeful. She was wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, and her hair was styled the way she knew I liked it. Her hands were folded in her lap, and I could see she was expecting either an apology or a surrender. "The osso buco is perfect," she said, trying to make normal conversation. "Just like our honeymoon in Italy, remember? When we got lost in that little village and the grandmother invited us to dinner?" "I remember," I said, taking a sip of wine. "Seems like a lifetime ago." "It doesn't have to be," she said softly. "David, I know this situation with Dad has been difficult, but maybe we can find a compromise. Maybe he could adjust the trust to include Marcus in some way, maybe a smaller amount or different conditions." I didn't say anything at first. I simply turned on the dining room television and connected my laptop. "David, what are you doing?" "I want to show you something," I said with the calm that comes from holding all the winning cards. "I think it's time you saw the whole picture." The first video began playing. Her father in our kitchen at dawn, telling her the house was rightfully hers, that I was an amateur who would back down when the legal bills started mounting. I watched Sarah's face tighten with confusion as she heard her father's voice calling me names and dismissing our marriage as temporary. "This is out of context," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "You don't understand the full conversation. There's more." The second video showed Robert deliberately damaging our floors. Every calculated scratch, every smirk at the camera. The evidence was undeniable. This wasn't an old man struggling with balance, it was deliberate vandalism. He wouldn't. Sarah started, but her protests were getting weaker. "Wait, it gets better." The third video was devastating. Robert throwing Marcus's treasured baseball in the trash, the casual cruelty of it, the complete disregard for a child's feelings. I watched my wife's face crumble as she saw her father deliberately destroying something precious to our son. "Oh God," Sarah whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "Why would he do that?" "Because he wants to hurt Marcus. Because he wants to break him down until he stops asking to be treated like family. And this," I said, playing the audio recording my attorney had legally obtained through his private investigator, "is the call to Child Protective Services." Robert's voice was unmistakable. "Yes, I need to report a dangerous situation for a child. The adoptive father is creating an unstable, potentially abusive environment. There's been yelling, threats of violence, and I'm concerned the child may be at risk of physical harm." Sarah's world collapsed in that moment. I watched her cycle through denial, shock, understanding, and finally, pure rage. But this time her anger wasn't directed at me. "How could I have been so blind?" she sobbed, mascara running down her cheeks. "How could I let him treat Marcus like this? How could I choose my father over our son? What kind of mother am I?" "You're the kind of mother who loves her father and wanted to believe the best of him," I said gently. "But Sarah, this has to end. Tonight." Just then we heard the front door slam. Robert was back from his poker game, probably satisfied after poisoning his friends against me with more lies about the unreasonable son-in-law who was trying to steal his daughter and grandchildren. Sarah wiped her tears and stood up with a determination I hadn't seen since we'd first met in college. She walked toward the guest wing with steps that sounded like gunshots. I followed at a distance. This was her battle to fight, her family to confront, her choice to make. She burst into his room without knocking. Robert was sitting at the small desk, counting poker chips and what looked like a substantial pile of cash. He'd apparently had a good night at the table, which probably meant he was in a particularly smug mood. "Dad," Sarah said in a voice I'd never heard her use, cold as Arctic wind, sharp as broken glass, "pack your things. You're leaving, tonight." Robert turned with that condescending smile he'd perfected over 7 decades, probably expecting to see his daughter coming to apologize for her husband's unreasonable behavior. "Excuse me, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. This is as much my house as it is yours. More so, actually, considering how much Henderson money went into buying and maintaining it." "I saw the videos, Dad. All of them." Sarah's voice was steady, controlled, more terrifying than any scream could have been. "I saw you destroy our property on purpose. I saw you throw away Marcus's baseball. I heard you call CPS with lies about David." The smile vanished from Robert's face like someone had flipped a switch. For the first time, I saw uncertainty creep into his eyes. "Whatever David has shown you, it's taken out of context. He's been manipulating evidence to turn you against your own family." "I saw you try to turn me against my husband," Sarah continued, stepping closer. "I saw you manipulate our finances, steal from our home, and worst of all..." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow made it more menacing. "I saw you push my son into the pool." "You have no proof of any of that," Robert stammered, but his legendary arrogance had evaporated completely. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him one of the videos. "Isn't this proof enough?" For the first time in the 12 years I'd known him, I saw genuine fear in Robert Henderson's eyes. Not just surprise or anger, but the deep, primal fear of a bully who finally understood his victims weren't powerless anymore. "You have until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m, Sarah continued, her voice getting stronger with every word. "Call whoever you need to call. Find somewhere to stay. Call Aunt Margaret. Call your country club friends. Call a hotel. I don't care where you go, but by 9 a.m. tomorrow, I don't want to see you in this house. You can't do this to me. I'm your father. I raised you. I put you through college. I helped buy this house." "A father doesn't hurt his daughter's children," Sarah replied, and I could hear years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. "A father doesn't lie to government agencies to harm innocent people. A father doesn't push a 12-year-old boy into a swimming pool because the boy hurt his feelings." Robert tried one last desperate manipulation tactic, the one that had worked for decades. "He's turned you against me. He's been planning this from the beginning. He's jealous of Henderson money and wants to cut me out so he can get his hands on the inheritance." "No," Sarah replied with terrifying calm. "You did this to yourself. Every cruel word to Marcus, every lie you told, every manipulation you tried, you built this prison yourself, brick by brick." She walked to his dresser and started pulling out clothes, throwing them onto his bed. "Aunt Margaret will be here at 8 a.m. to pick you up. I've already called her." "You called Margaret? What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth. I sent her the videos. She's seen what kind of man you really are." Robert's face went white. Margaret was his younger sister, the only family member whose opinion he'd ever cared about. If she had turned against him too... "She didn't believe it," he said weakly. "She did. She said, and I quote, 'I always wondered why Robert's relationships with his grandchildren seemed so conditional. Now I know.'" I stood in the doorway, watching the power dynamic completely reverse. The man who had terrorized my family for weeks, who had made my son feel unwanted in his own home, was now scrambling to pack his belongings like a criminal fleeing the scene of a crime. For the first time in months, I felt hope, not just for getting rid of Robert, but for saving my marriage and my family. The next morning brought a scene I never thought I'd witness in my lifetime. Sarah, with an efficiency I didn't know she possessed, helped her father pack his remaining belongings. There were no tears, no dramatic pleas, just the heavy silence of a relationship dying in real time. Robert made one final attempt at emotional blackmail. He collapsed into the guest room chair, sobbing with theatrical desperation that would have impressed Broadway directors. "You're destroying our family," he wailed, reaching for Sarah's hands with the desperation of a drowning man. "I'm your father! I gave you everything! I sacrificed everything for you! You can't abandon me now!" Sarah stopped and looked down at him. The ice in her voice could have frozen hell itself. "No, Dad. You destroyed our family when you decided Marcus wasn't worth loving, when you chose your prejudices over your grandson's happiness." She knelt to his level, and for a moment, I thought she might waver. Instead, she delivered the killing blow. "You had a choice between being a grandfather to a wonderful boy who needed love, or clinging to your outdated ideas about blood and biology. You chose hatred. Now live with the consequences." Robert tried one more angle. "What about when you were little? What about all the times I took care of you? What about when your mother died and I raised you alone? Doesn't that count for anything?" "It counted for everything," Sarah said quietly. "That's why this hurts so much. The father who raised me would never have treated a child the way you've treated Marcus. The man I looked up to would never have pushed a little boy into a pool. I don't know who you've become, but you're not the father I remember." Robert's sister Margaret arrived at exactly 8 a.m, punctual as always. The tension in the room was suffocating as she surveyed the packed suitcases and the wreckage of family relationships. "What really happened here, David?" she asked me directly, her voice carefully neutral. I didn't need to answer. Sarah handed her phone to her aunt, one of the videos already queued up. I watched Margaret's face transform from confusion to disgust as she saw her brother deliberately damaging our property, heard him plotting against me, witnessed his casual cruelty toward Marcus. "Jesus Christ, Robert," Margaret whispered, her voice filled with a combination of horror and disappointment. "What else have you done?" Robert tried his final card. "They're fake videos. David manipulated them somehow. He's a computer programmer. He could have created all of this." But Margaret had seen enough. She was a retired judge, and she knew real evidence when she saw it. "Get your things, Robert. Let's go. We'll discuss living arrangements once we get to my house." As they loaded the car, Robert turned to me with a look of pure hatred. His mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the bitter, vindictive man underneath. "This isn't over, David. I have lawyers. I have connections. I'll make sure you regret this for the rest of your miserable life." I walked up to him, and in the calmest voice I could manage, said, "You already tried your worst, and you lost. Don't make this harder on yourself than it needs to be." But I was wrong to think it was over. Robert Henderson wasn't finished with his war. He was just changing battlefields, and his next attack would be more vicious than anything he'd done while living in our house. The assault began the next morning. Sarah woke up to her phone buzzing incessantly. Text messages, Facebook notifications, voicemails, emails. Friends, extended family, acquaintances, even people we barely knew from church and neighborhood associations. "How could you throw your own father out on the street? Your dad called me crying. He says David has turned you against your own family. I saw your father's Facebook post about what happened. I'm praying for him during this difficult time. Robert is heartbroken. He says you've chosen that boy over your own blood." Robert had launched his nuclear weapon, a Facebook post that was a masterpiece of manipulation and emotional warfare. He had crafted it perfectly, painting himself as a frail, elderly man unjustly evicted by a controlling son-in-law and a brainwashed daughter. He wrote tearfully about only wanting to maintain family unity and how his heart was shattered by our inexplicable cruelty. The post was a work of art in its deception. He described coming to stay with us temporarily while recovering from health issues. He talked about trying to bridge generational differences and help guide the family through difficult decisions. He painted me as jealous and controlling, someone who couldn't tolerate an older man's wisdom and experience. He conveniently omitted the theft, the CPS call, the property damage, and the pool incident. He made no mention of his deliberate exclusion of Marcus from the trust fund or his cruel comments about adoption and bloodlines. In his version, he was the perfect grandfather, trying to help his family, and we were ungrateful children who had thrown him out for mysterious, irrational reasons. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Robert had cultivated relationships in our community for decades, and many people knew him as the successful businessman, the widower who had raised his daughter alone, the man who wrote substantial checks to local charities. They didn't know about his capacity for cruelty or manipulation. I watched Sarah read through the post and the mounting comments, her face cycling through fury and pain. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if the old doubts would return, if the pressure from friends and family would make her second-guess what she'd seen with her own eyes. But then she looked up at me with eyes like steel, and I knew the woman I'd married was finally, fully awake. "The time for silence is over," she said, her voice carrying a determination I'd never heard before. She didn't engage in comment wars or try to argue in Robert's post. That would have made her look defensive and given him exactly the public drama he wanted. Instead, she did something much more strategic and devastating. She created a private group message with key family members, people whose opinions mattered, people who had influence in our extended social circle. Her message was simple and direct. "I know many of you have seen Dad's post. Before forming any opinions, I ask that you watch these videos and listen to this audio. The evidence speaks for itself. I won't be making any public statements, but I wanted the people closest to our family to understand what really happened." She attached the footage of the theft, the property damage, the audio of the CPS call, and for the people she trusted most, the video of Robert pushing Marcus into the pool. Then, with surgical precision, she posted a single public comment under Robert's Facebook post. "Dad, it breaks my heart that you've chosen to make this public with a version so disconnected from reality. The decision we made was the hardest of our lives, and it was to protect our son. I won't engage in a public war here, but our family members have access to the full truth. I hope someday you'll find the help you need." It was checkmate in a single move. Robert's post was exposed as fiction without Sarah having to argue or defend herself publicly. She had taken the high road while simultaneously destroying his credibility with the people who mattered. The response was swift and decisive. Within hours, the tone of the messages completely changed. People who had attacked us in the morning were sending apologies by evening. Family members who had seen the evidence rallied to our side, some even sharing their own stories of Robert's manipulative behaviour over the years. My brother-in-law James called that evening, his voice shaking with anger. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Dad was capable of this. The video of him pushing Marcus, Jesus Christ, I wanted to drive over there and beat the hell out of him myself." Sarah's cousin Patricia, a family court judge, was even more direct. "That man is lucky you didn't press charges. What he did to Marcus constitutes assault on a minor, and filing false CPS reports, that's a felony. He should be in jail, not posting sob stories on Facebook." By the end of the day, we noticed Robert had deleted his post, unable to face the humiliation of being caught in such elaborate lies. The comments that remained before deletion told the story. Friend after friend withdrawing their support as the evidence circulated, family members expressing disgust at his actions, even his poker buddies from the country club questioning his version of events. His final weapon had exploded in his face, leaving him completely isolated and publicly humiliated. That night, Sarah did something that showed me our healing had truly begun. She went to our bedroom closet and pulled out an ornate wooden box I'd never seen before. "What's that?" I asked. "It's every piece of jewellery Dad ever gave me," she said, opening it to reveal an impressive collection of rings, necklaces, bracelets, even a diamond tennis bracelet that must have cost $20,000. Every piece came with conditions, expectations, strings attached, birthday gifts that came with lectures about family loyalty, Christmas presents that came with reminders of how much he'd sacrificed for me. They weren't gifts, they were chains. The next day, we went to a high-end jewellery store in downtown Seattle. The appraiser's eyes widened when he saw the collection. Robert had excellent taste and deep pockets. We sold everything. Every ring, every necklace, every reminder of conditional love and manipulative generosity. With the money, nearly $60,000, we did something that felt like the perfect ending to Robert's chapter in our lives. We opened a college fund for Marcus, something Robert's trust would never provide. We also set aside money for family therapy, recognizing that we all needed help processing what had happened. But most importantly, we used some of the money to create new traditions, new memories that belonged to us alone. That afternoon, we sat down with Marcus for a conversation that had been long overdue. "Son," Sarah began, taking his hands in hers, "do you remember how you've always wanted to go to baseball camp this summer? The overnight camp in Oregon, where they teach advanced pitching techniques?" Marcus nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes, but also wariness. But Grandpa Rob said it was a waste of money, and that I'd never be good enough to play in high school anyway. He said I should focus on more realistic goals. The casual cruelty of it hit me again. Robert hadn't just excluded Marcus from the trust fund, he'd actively tried to crush the boy's dreams and aspirations. "Well," Sarah continued, and I could hear her voice getting stronger, "Grandpa Rob was wrong about a lot of things. Your dreams aren't a waste of money, they're investments in your future. How does baseball camp sound? And maybe some private coaching when you get back." Marcus's eyes went wide with disbelief and pure joy. "Really? Even though I'm not? Even though Grandpa Rob said I'm not really family?" Sarah's face crumpled momentarily before she gathered herself. "Marcus, listen to me very carefully. You are absolutely, completely, 100% our family. You're not adopted family or step-family or any other kind of qualifier. You're just family. Period. And anyone who doesn't see that doesn't deserve to be in our lives." I watched my son process this, saw the weight of weeks of cruel comments and deliberate exclusion finally lifting from his shoulders. "So I can really go to baseball camp." "You can really go to baseball camp," I confirmed. "And when you get back, we're going to have a party to celebrate. A real family party, with people who love you for exactly who you are." The specific cruelty Robert had inflicted, not just excluding Marcus, but actively crushing his aspirations, was being transformed into fuel for those very dreams. It felt like justice, served cold and sweet. That night, as Marcus slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Sarah and I sat on our back deck, looking out at the pool where our son had nearly drowned because of one old man's vindictive cruelty. "I keep thinking about what kind of person pushes a child into water," Sarah said quietly. "What happens to someone that makes them capable of that?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. "And I don't think I want to understand it. I just want to make sure Marcus never has to experience anything like that again." Sarah took my hand. Dad was stealing our happiness piece by piece, and I was helping him do it. I was so focused on being a good daughter that I forgot how to be a good mother. "You're a great mother, Sarah. You just had to choose which family mattered more. It should never have been a choice," she said, tears in her voice. "The moment he excluded Marcus from that trust fund, the moment he made our son feel less than, I should have thrown him out myself." For the first time in months, our house felt like the home it was meant to be. No more walking on eggshells, no more coded conversations, no more watching Marcus shrink into himself every time Robert entered a room. The transformation was remarkable. Within days, Marcus was back to his old self, laughing, joking, bringing friends over after school. The house filled with the sounds of childhood again. Video games, music practice, teenage voices debating everything from sports to movies. 6 months later, we had completely transformed Robert's former domain. The guest wing became Marcus's hangout space, a gaming room with comfortable furniture, a big screen TV, and enough space for him and his friends to spread out. The bedroom became a study room, quiet and organised, perfect for homework and reading. The echoes of conflict had been replaced by the sounds of laughter and normal family life. The real conclusion came with a phone call on a Tuesday evening in late fall. Sarah stepped away to take it privately, and when she returned 20 minutes later, her expression was an indecipherable mix of sadness, relief, and something that might have been closure. "That was Aunt Margaret," she said quietly, sitting beside me on the couch. She couldn't handle Dad anymore. The lies, the manipulation, the constant attempts to turn her against Uncle Frank and the rest of the family. It was the same pattern we lived through, just with different targets. She paused, gathering her thoughts. He tried to convince her that Uncle Frank was stealing from her, that her own children were plotting against her. When she wouldn't believe him, he started making anonymous complaints to the police about suspicious activity at her house, just like he did with CPS and us. I felt a chill run down my spine. What happened? Margaret and Frank had him evaluated by a geriatric psychiatrist. The doctor said Dad has developed what he called late-onset paranoid personality disorder with narcissistic features. Basically, his need to control everyone around him has turned into full-blown delusion and paranoia. The news settled over the room like dust. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, just the weight of an inevitable conclusion. "They've moved him into a specialised memory care facility," Sarah continued. "Not because his memory is failing, but because he needs intensive psychiatric care, and they're the only place equipped to handle his behavioural issues. Margaret and I will split the costs." "You didn't put him there," I said, pulling her close. "He built that road himself, choice by choice, manipulation by manipulation." "I know," she said quietly, "but it's still sad. The father I remember wouldn't have hurt a child. Something broke in him, and I don't know when or why." That night, Sarah took the 3 unopened letters Robert had sent in recent weeks, increasingly desperate attempts to reconcile, each one blaming everyone but himself for the situation, and fed them, unread, into our paper shredder. It was her final act of closure, the symbolic end of a relationship that had become too toxic to salvage. "I don't need to read his excuses," she said, watching the paper disappear into confetti. "I know what he did, I saw what he did, and that's all I need to know." Marcus, free from the shadow of disapproval and conditional love, has blossomed into a confident, outgoing teenager. His grades improved dramatically once the stress of Robert's presence was removed. He made the junior varsity baseball team as a freshman, something Robert had told him was impossible. Most importantly, he smiles again, the easy, unself-conscious smile of a child who knows he's loved without conditions. The baseball camp was a transformative experience. Marcus came home every day exhausted but glowing with pride. full of stories about new techniques he'd learned and friends he'd made. The coaches praised his attitude and work ethic, and one even suggested he had the potential to play college ball if he kept developing his skills. You know what the best part was? Marcus told us on the last day of camp. When they asked us to talk about our families, I didn't have to explain anything weird or complicated. I just said my parents are Sarah and David Peterson, and that was it. Normal family, normal story. The simplicity of it brought tears to my eyes. For the first time in his life, Marcus didn't have to navigate complex explanations about adoption, blood relations, or why certain family members treated him differently. He was just a kid at baseball camp, talking about his parents. One evening in late summer, as we watched Marcus practice pitching in our backyard, Sarah took my hands and said something that both broke and healed my heart simultaneously. My real family is you and him. That's all that matters. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I'm sorry I let my father hurt our son. I'm sorry I put you in a position where you had to give me an ultimatum to wake me up. You don't need to apologize, I said. You were trying to love everyone. That's not a character flaw. Yes, it is, when loving one person means letting them hurt another. When my father made Marcus choose between being grateful for scraps or being excluded entirely, I should have ended it right there. I should have protected our son. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching our boy perfect his curveball, listening to the satisfying pop of the ball hitting his glove. The pool where Robert had pushed him was now just a pool again, a place for swimming and pool parties and normal summer fun. The trust fund situation eventually resolved itself in an unexpected way. Sarah's uncle Frank, who had witnessed some of Robert's behaviour firsthand during family gatherings, approached us with a proposal. He wanted to establish an education fund for Marcus, completely separate from the Henderson family trust. That boy deserves to go to college. Frank said simply, Robert was wrong about a lot of things, but he was especially wrong about family. Blood doesn't make you family, love does, and anyone can see how much you love that kid. The fund Frank established was larger than what Marcus would have received from Robert's trust, and it came with no conditions about bloodlines or family politics, just love and support for a kid who deserved every opportunity in the world. When we told Marcus about the fund, his reaction was typically understated. That's really nice of Uncle Frank, he said, but you know what? Even if there was no money for college at all, I'd still rather be here with you guys than anywhere else in the world. The wisdom and maturity in that statement took my breath away. This kid, who had endured rejection and cruelty from someone who should have loved him unconditionally, had emerged with his heart intact and his priorities straight. Now I ask you, Reddit, what would you have done in my place? Should I have acted sooner when I first saw the signs of Robert's treatment of Marcus? Was my ultimatum too harsh, or should I have tried harder to find a compromise? Looking back, I wish I had protected Marcus from the beginning, before Robert had the chance to make him feel unwanted. But I also know that sometimes the most important battles are the ones that force everyone to choose sides clearly and definitively. The hardest part wasn't fighting Robert. It was watching my wife struggle between the father who raised her and the son who needed her protection. But in the end, she made the right choice, and our family is stronger for having gone through this trial together. Edit. Several people have asked about the legal consequences for Robert's actions. My attorney confirmed that the CPS call and the assault on Marcus could have resulted in criminal charges, but given his mental health evaluation and the fact that he's now in specialised care, we decided not to pursue prosecution. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and protecting your family from further harm. Edit 2. We kept our promise about baseball camp, and Marcus is already excited about next summer's programme. Watching him come home every day exhausted but glowing with pride was the moment I knew we had truly won the war that mattered most, the fight for our son's happiness, self-worth and place in our family. The trust fund was never really about money. It was about belonging, and Marcus belongs with us, completely and unconditionally. Edit 3. For those asking about Sarah's relationship with the rest of her family, most of them have been incredibly supportive once they learned the truth. Robert's behaviour apparently wasn't completely surprising to some of the older relatives, who had their own stories of his controlling and manipulative tendencies over the years. The family is healing, but it's clear that Robert burned a lot of bridges with his actions, not just with us. The most important thing is that Marcus now knows without any doubt that he is loved, wanted and valued exactly as he is. No conditions, no qualifications, no small print, just pure, unconditional family love. And honestly, that's worth more than any trust fund could ever be.